The Song of Solomon is probably the most mysterious, poetic, and misunderstood book in the entire Bible. Often skimmed over or awkwardly avoided in sermons, this ancient scripture bursts with passion, vivid imagery, and intense expressions of love and desire. But have you ever wondered why God would place such explicit poetry in the Holy Scriptures? What spiritual truths lie hidden within these romantic verses? And what deeper meaning about intimacy and marriage does God intend for us to uncover? Today, we'll venture into the rich poetic language of the Song of Solomon, exploring why God created such intense desire, how he views intimacy in marriage, and the beautiful boundaries he set for it. We'll dive deeply into passages rarely discussed openly in church, illuminating them through complementary scriptures like 1 Corinthians 7 and Proverbs 5. If you're intrigued, hit that like button, subscribe for more eye-opening content, and make sure your notifications are on. And don't forget, share your opinion below. Why do you think the church avoids discussing the Song of Solomon openly? The Song of Solomon captivates us from the very first verses with passionate declarations between lovers, and yet many churches tend to shy away from addressing this rich, poetic expression of intimacy directly. But if God, in his perfect wisdom, chose to include such a vivid depiction of love and passion, shouldn't we explore what he wants us to learn from it? Could there be divine wisdom hidden beneath these verses, waiting for us to discover the beauty, sacredness, and spirituality of romantic intimacy? When we first encounter the Song of Solomon, we're immediately drawn into a conversation filled with symbolic beauty and vibrant imagery. It portrays a passionate relationship between a bride and her bridegroom, capturing every dimension of their love, the physical, emotional, and spiritual. Yet, one of the most significant reasons this scripture can feel awkward or controversial is precisely because it's so explicit about physical attraction, desire, and intimacy. But let's step back and reflect. Why would God intentionally inspire such openness about passion in the sacred scriptures? What purpose does this serve? God's inclusion of passionate romance in the Bible isn't accidental. It's purposeful and deeply meaningful. By placing the Song of Solomon in the heart of the scriptures, God validates love, attraction, and sexual intimacy within the boundaries he lovingly designed, marriage. And more than simply validating it, God elevates it to something beautiful, pure, and holy. Intimacy isn't merely tolerated by God, it's celebrated. In fact, within marriage, intimacy becomes a profound spiritual experience, pointing toward a deeper, sacred connection. The passionate poetry of Song of Solomon vividly depicts two people completely enthralled by each other, longing, pursuing, delighting, and finding fulfillment in mutual love and commitment. The symbolism used in these verses is intentional. Throughout history, scholars and theologians have pointed out how this passionate love story also symbolizes the deep love Christ has for his church. It reflects the profound intimacy God desires with each believer, pure, passionate, and committed. But often, this dual symbolism leads to confusion or discomfort, causing churches and preachers to avoid addressing the song openly. It's true, these verses, filled with erotic imagery and passionate exchanges, can feel out of place when compared to the rest of Scripture, which we typically associate with solemnity, reverence, or moral teaching. Yet, when approached carefully and prayerfully, the Song of Solomon can deeply enrich our understanding of what marriage and intimacy should represent in a believer's life. Let's reflect on one of the most beautiful and passionate expressions found in Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 7, which states, "You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you." This verse, while straightforwardly romantic, also holds immense spiritual meaning. It shows how, within marriage, love should be affirming, generous, and unconditionally accepting. This mirrors Christ's love toward us, his bride, as he sees us as perfect and flawless through his sacrifice and grace. Imagine how different marriages could be if spouses spoke to one another with such grace-filled, affirming words. Another remarkable example can be seen in Song of Solomon 8:6-7. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Such intense language again serves two purposes. Firstly, it describes the powerful, enduring nature of true marital love, committed, fiercely loyal, and passionately protective. Secondly, it represents the jealousy of God's love, an unwavering commitment, fiercely protective and deeply passionate about his relationship with humanity. This poetic richness in Song of Solomon thus invites us into deeper reflections about our own relationships and spiritual lives. Still, a lingering question remains. If the Song of Solomon celebrates intimacy so openly, why has the church historically been so hesitant or even embarrassed by these scriptures? One reason might be the influence of cultural attitudes towards sexuality throughout history. Often, cultures have treated sexuality as something shameful or secretive, especially in religious contexts. This mindset, while understandable due to cultural taboos, actually misrepresents God's original intent for intimacy. God's design was never meant to be shameful. Instead, intimacy is a divine gift, intentionally created to strengthen marital bonds, promote unity, and enrich our emotional and spiritual lives. Consider the New Testament perspective provided by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 7:3-5, where he advises couples not to deprive each other of intimacy except for mutual consent and prayer. Here, Paul clearly highlights intimacy as a vital, healthy, and even spiritual part of married life. Far from being taboo, intimacy within marriage is presented as necessary for relational harmony, mutual respect, and deep emotional connection. Paul's direct acknowledgement of sexual intimacy underscores God's holistic approach to marriage, spiritually, emotionally, and physically interconnected. Similarly, Proverbs 5:18-19 emphasizes, "Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Be intoxicated always in her love." Such language doesn't shy away from passion. Rather, it encourages marital delight as a means of protection against temptation and as a celebration of God's perfect design. The wisdom here is clear. Intimacy, joy, and passion are meant to be ongoing parts of marriage, not something we awkwardly hide or neglect. But this powerful affirmation of intimacy comes with clear boundaries and divine order. God doesn't present sexuality without guidance. Rather, the Bible consistently teaches that intimacy reaches its highest expression when enjoyed within the sacred boundaries of marriage. Within these boundaries, intimacy becomes an act of love, respect, service, and mutual blessing. Outside these boundaries, intimacy loses its sacredness, becoming something that can hurt, harm, and destroy relationships. Perhaps the greatest reason God placed such passionate poetry in the scriptures is to protect and enrich marriages. Passionate intimacy acts as a powerful bond, drawing spouses closer emotionally and spiritually. It serves as a constant reminder of God's generous love toward humanity, reflecting the intensity of his desire for an intimate relationship with us. In this sense, the Song of Solomon isn't simply about human love. It points us toward a divine love that desires closeness, affection, and deep relational unity. Yet for many, these truths remain unexplored or misunderstood. Too often, believers carry guilt, confusion, or misconceptions around the topic of intimacy, especially because the church seldom openly discusses these topics. Thus, the Song of Solomon calls us to revisit our perspective, both personally and spiritually, on intimacy, passion, and marriage. It invites us to celebrate intimacy as a sacred gift, rather than avoid it due to awkwardness or cultural discomfort. Now, reflecting on everything we've explored so far, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Why do you think intimacy, though so clearly affirmed in Scripture, continues to be an uncomfortable subject in many Christian communities today? Leave your comments below. Let's create an open dialogue about this vital and beautiful part of our spiritual journey. And remember, if you're finding this topic enlightening and valuable, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into biblical truths, and don't forget to share this video with friends who might find it helpful too. Together, we can foster healthier, spiritually vibrant marriages through an open and honest understanding of God's beautiful design. When we talk about intimacy and sexuality as revealed in the Song of Solomon, it becomes clear that God sees intimacy as something holy, precious, and worthy of deep respect. However, the real-life experience of many Christian couples tells a very different story. For generations, believers have carried various misconceptions and fears around the idea of sexuality, often viewing it through a lens of shame or guilt. But this couldn't be further from God's intended purpose. In fact, Song of Solomon boldly reveals intimacy as a divine gift intended to be enjoyed fully, joyfully, and without embarrassment within the safety of marriage. Consider again the vivid imagery and deeply poetic language used throughout the book. Expressions such as, "Your love is more delightful than wine," or "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth," are powerful statements that show us that romantic love and physical expressions of it are part of God's perfect design. These verses aren't hidden away, obscurely referenced, or subtly hinted at. They're placed openly and proudly within the canon of Scripture itself. Why then do we hesitate to openly discuss and celebrate these beautiful verses? One key reason may be rooted in historical church teachings that separated spirituality from physicality, portraying the physical as lesser or inherently corrupt. These misguided teachings have sometimes created an unnecessary disconnect between our spiritual lives and physical intimacy. But the Bible never supports such division. Instead, it consistently portrays human beings as holistic creations, mind, spirit, and body interconnected, with each dimension intended for God's glory and our blessing. The early church fathers sometimes wrestled with this subject, often reflecting cultural rather than biblical attitudes toward intimacy. While they rightly emphasized chastity and purity outside marriage, the unintended consequence was often a negative view toward all forms of sexuality, even within marriage. Today, many Christians continue to carry the weight of those historical attitudes. Yet, revisiting the biblical text reveals that God never intended intimacy to be perceived negatively or with shame. On the contrary, Song of Solomon strongly affirms that intimacy within marriage is pure, joyous, and deeply spiritual. Let's examine another powerful passage from Song of Solomon chapter 7, verses 10 to 12. "I belong to my beloved, and his desire is for me. Come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside. There I will give you my love." Notice how these verses beautifully intertwine mutual belonging, emotional closeness, and physical desire. The intimacy depicted here isn't merely physical, it's deeply emotional, rooted in belonging, acceptance, and security. This perfectly aligns with how modern psychology affirms healthy intimacy, founded on trust, emotional safety, and mutual respect. Such verses challenge us to reconsider how we approach marital intimacy today. Are our relationships characterized by such openness, freedom, and mutual delight? If not, what obstacles are holding us back? Is it past teaching, personal experiences, cultural taboos, or unresolved shame? Identifying these barriers can help us break free from misconceptions, allowing us to fully embrace God's original design for intimacy. The Song of Solomon also reminds us of the sacredness and exclusivity of marriage. Intimacy here isn't portrayed as casual or fleeting. It's profound, deeply committed, and enduring. Throughout the poetic dialogue, the lovers continually affirm their exclusive bond. "My beloved is mine and I am his," reinforces this divine truth. Intimacy reaches its fullest potential within the safety, loyalty, and commitment of marriage. This brings us to another essential truth emphasized by Song of Solomon. Intimacy requires intentionality. Marriages thrive not through passive coexistence, but through actively cultivating intimacy and connection. The poetic dialogues in Song of Solomon are filled with intentional expressions of admiration, affection, and passionate pursuit. Far from being an afterthought, intimacy in marriage is portrayed as something couples consciously and intentionally nurture. For couples today, this serves as a powerful reminder. Intimacy doesn't simply happen by accident. It must be intentionally prioritized, protected, and nourished. Yet another dimension emerges from these scriptures, the power of intimacy as a safeguard. Proverbs 5:15-17 echoes this idea clearly, stating, "Drink water from your own cistern. Should your springs overflow in the streets?" Here, intimacy within marriage is described as a protective force, shielding the relationship from temptations and distractions. This aligns perfectly with modern psychological insights that affirm emotional and physical intimacy as critical components of marital satisfaction and relational security. Still, one question arises frequently among believers. If intimacy is so profoundly spiritual and pure within marriage, why does Scripture set clear boundaries around it? Simply put, boundaries aren't meant to limit joy. Rather, they are designed to protect it. God knows that intimacy's power is both beautiful and potent. Used within marriage, it binds, heals, and enriches. Misused, it wounds, fractures, and leads to emotional, spiritual, and relational damage. Boundaries, therefore, are an expression of God's protective love, ensuring intimacy remains a blessing, never becoming a source of hurt or regret. The Apostle Paul reinforces this truth in 1 Corinthians 6:18-20, stating, "Flee from sexual immorality. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." And notice Paul doesn't condemn intimacy. He calls for honoring God through it. The emphasis is on holiness, self-respect, and mutual respect within marriage. God's boundaries regarding intimacy are thus safeguards, not restrictions. They protect the dignity, sanctity, and longevity of marital relationships. Now let's briefly address an objection many might be feeling right now. What about those who've experienced hurt or disappointment in this area? Perhaps carrying emotional wounds from past relationships or misunderstandings of intimacy. Does Song of Solomon offer anything for them? Absolutely. God's intent isn't just to celebrate intimacy, but also to redeem it. For those who've faced brokenness or regret, the Song of Solomon speaks gently and redemptively, inviting healing and restoration. It points toward the love of Christ, which redeems even the most wounded parts of our lives, including intimacy. Understanding intimacy as a redemptive gift changes everything. It shifts us from viewing intimacy through lenses of guilt or shame into seeing it as something inherently good, inherently spiritual, and inherently healing when aligned with God's purposes. When intimacy is approached with a heart rooted in mutual respect, spiritual awareness, and committed love, it becomes transformative, not only in marriage, but also in our broader spiritual walk with God. In exploring these truths together, it becomes increasingly clear why we need open and honest dialogue in our communities about intimacy. Avoiding discussions about the Song of Solomon means missing out on profound insights God desires us to grasp, truths intended to bring freedom, joy, and deeper relational fulfillment. As we continue exploring this powerful book, I'd love to know your perspective on something important. Have you ever felt that misunderstandings or discomfort surrounding intimacy have impacted your marriage or your understanding of spirituality? Do you think openly discussing these passages in church settings could lead to stronger, healthier relationships among believers? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely look forward to reading your insights. And if this exploration has resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more empowering biblical truths, and hit that notification bell to stay updated with future discussions. Remember, sharing this video with your friends and family might open doors to conversations that enrich their spiritual lives as well. Diving even deeper into the Song of Solomon, we're continually confronted with one undeniable truth. Intimacy was designed by God to be both powerful and purposeful. But here's where many believers often experience confusion or difficulty, understanding how intimacy can be both holy and passionately expressive at the same time. Could passionate intimacy and holiness truly coexist without contradiction? The answer is a resounding yes. And the Song of Solomon is a bold testament to that truth. For centuries, many religious traditions have unintentionally promoted the idea that holiness and passion stand at odds, that to be truly spiritual, one must suppress or hide their natural desires. Yet the Bible consistently teaches the opposite. Passion itself is not inherently unholy. Rather, it's about context, purpose, and alignment with God's divine intent. Song of Solomon is precisely the example we need, showing us clearly how passion becomes sacred when anchored in genuine love, respect, and covenantal commitment. Take, for instance, the passionate description found in Song of Solomon 5:10-16, where the woman openly praises her beloved's physical appearance. "My beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely." Nay, this vivid admiration might make modern readers blush, or even wonder if such explicit admiration belongs in a sacred text. Yet rather than diminishing holiness, these passionate expressions of admiration and desire reinforce the sacred bond shared by husband and wife. They underscore how mutual admiration, both emotional and physical, strengthens marital unity. Another dimension Song of Solomon beautifully illustrates is that intimacy in marriage is intended to bring joy, fulfillment, and emotional nourishment. Song of Solomon 2:16 poetically declares, "My beloved is mine, and I am his." Such declarations aren't merely poetic. They carry profound emotional truth. They reveal intimacy as more than physical union. It's an emotional and spiritual reassurance of belonging. Within marriage, intimacy communicates to each partner you are valued, desired, and securely loved. This contrasts sharply with prevailing cultural ideas about sexuality, where intimacy often becomes commodified, transactional, or casually detached from emotional meaning. The scriptures, particularly Song of Solomon, call us back to intimacy's true nature, a deeply emotional, committed, and secure expression of love. Yet, even with these clear affirmations, practical questions arise. Couples often wonder how to balance passion with holiness. Are there practical guidelines to ensure intimacy remains honoring to God? Thankfully, the Bible offers ample wisdom on this matter. Returning to the New Testament, 1 Thessalonians 4:3-5 instructs believers clearly, "It is God's will that you should be sanctified. Each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable." Notice the emphasis here. Holiness involves control, intentionality, and respect. It isn't about suppressing intimacy. Rather, it's about stewarding it wisely, purposefully, and lovingly. Similarly, Hebrews 13:4 powerfully states, "Marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure." Here again, intimacy within marriage is affirmed strongly and positively, with clear instruction about maintaining purity and honor. Holiness, then, is not the absence of passion. It's the presence of respect, love, and fidelity within marital intimacy. Perhaps this understanding clarifies why Song of Solomon feels simultaneously bold and reverent. Passionate desire is never portrayed as something selfish or exploitative. Rather, desire is expressed lovingly, honorably, and respectfully exactly how God intends intimacy to be. Therefore, couples who embrace intimacy in this sacred context not only enrich their emotional connection, but also deepen their spiritual union. Consider then another critical insight from Song of Solomon. Intimacy thrives best in a relationship marked by openness and vulnerability. In the poetic exchanges between the lovers, vulnerability is a common theme. They openly express longing, insecurity, and reassurance to one another, as seen clearly in Song of Solomon 1:5-6, where the woman vulnerably shares feelings of inadequacy about her appearance. Her beloved's response, full of affirmation and tenderness, reveals intimacy's true power, healing, affirming, and emotionally securing both partners. Yet today, vulnerability in intimacy is often misunderstood or feared. Society's expectations, fear of rejection, or past emotional wounds often keep couples from experiencing the true depth of intimacy God designed. However, as Song of Solomon demonstrates, true intimacy requires vulnerability, openness, and trust. Only when partners willingly share their hearts, desires, fears, and dreams can intimacy reach the depth God intended. A union that transcends mere physicality, entering profoundly emotional and spiritual territory. But what about couples struggling to find this deeper intimacy? Does Song of Solomon offer practical insights into building stronger emotional and spiritual connections through intimacy? Indeed, it does. One such insight is intentional communication. Throughout Song of Solomon, we see repeated affirmations, compliments, and loving communication. The lovers constantly express admiration, appreciation, and affection. Today, practical psychology echoes this biblical wisdom, recognizing communication as foundational to marital satisfaction. Openly expressing affection, admiration, and appreciation fosters emotional safety, trust, and deeper relational intimacy. Another essential aspect Song of Solomon highlights is mutuality in intimacy. The poetic dialogue is beautifully balanced. Both lovers express their desires, feelings, and affirmations openly and equally. This mutual exchange underlines a critical truth. True intimacy is reciprocal, never exploitative or one-sided. Both partners contribute to and benefit equally from intimacy, creating a relationship dynamic marked by respect, dignity, and mutual delight. Despite these clear biblical truths, many couples today struggle precisely because mutuality in intimacy isn't always present. Cultural stereotypes or misconceptions sometimes create imbalanced dynamics, robbing intimacy of its intended beauty and joy. For believers, reclaiming this biblical principle of mutuality can transform intimacy from routine into something richly fulfilling and spiritually meaningful. Understanding intimacy as an expression of God's divine love also invites a broader reflection. Could marital intimacy actually reflect something even deeper? God's own heart for relationship? Absolutely. Throughout Scripture, marriage serves as a metaphor for God's relationship with humanity, particularly Christ's love for His church. Thus, marital intimacy becomes a powerful metaphor for divine intimacy, an intimate, deeply personal, and profoundly spiritual relationship God desires with each believer. This parallel between human and divine intimacy is critical. It helps believers understand intimacy as sacred, mirroring the vulnerability, trust, and depth God desires in our relationship with Him. Just as marital intimacy flourishes in openness and trust, so does our spiritual intimacy with God. Therefore, understanding and cultivating healthy marital intimacy can also deepen our understanding of intimacy with God, enriching our spiritual lives profoundly. Given these profound insights, let's open a genuine dialogue about intimacy among believers today. Why do you think the church often struggles to balance openness about intimacy with maintaining a standard of holiness? Is there perhaps a fear that open discussion could encourage inappropriate behavior, or is it simply cultural discomfort that continues to hold back honest conversations? I truly want to know your perspective, so please leave your comments below. How can churches better support couples in cultivating healthy, holy intimacy? Have you personally experienced the church as a safe space for such conversations? Or has silence around intimacy caused confusion or struggle in your own life? If you're finding value and inspiration in this exploration, remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell. Every interaction helps our community grow and encourages more open, life-changing conversations around topics that truly matter. And if you believe others could benefit from this message, share this video widely, because understanding God's true intent for intimacy can transform relationships, marriages, and spiritual lives profoundly. As we've journeyed deeply through the poetic and passionate language of Song of Solomon, one fundamental truth has emerged again and again. Intimacy, as designed by God, is profoundly beautiful, deeply spiritual, and inherently good. Yet there's still a lingering question that deserves exploration. If intimacy is so clearly celebrated in Scripture, why do so many Christians struggle with guilt, shame, or uncertainty around this topic? The reality is that many Christians, perhaps yourself included, have grown up hearing more about what intimacy shouldn't be, rather than what it could and should be. Traditional teachings often focus solely on prohibitions, rather than on God's generous and celebratory vision for marital intimacy. The unintended consequence? Believers frequently enter marriage carrying misunderstandings, misconceptions, or even fear around the very thing God intended as a gift. Consider how Song of Solomon directly challenges these negative assumptions. Its explicit yet poetic celebration of passion, attraction, and mutual enjoyment within marriage powerfully rebukes any notion of marital intimacy as shameful. Instead, the text boldly proclaims intimacy as joyful, fulfilling, and spiritually enriching. God's purpose, it seems clear, wasn't merely to restrict or confine intimacy, but to guard its purity and enhance its sacredness within the safety of covenantal love. One significant misconception to address here is the false notion that passionate desire itself is sinful or shameful. Scripture makes a careful distinction. Desire itself isn't inherently sinful. Rather, sin occurs when desire operates outside God's loving boundaries. Inside marriage, passionate desire becomes a means of strengthening emotional bonds, deepening trust, and cultivating mutual respect and tenderness. This distinction is vividly illustrated throughout Song of Solomon. Consider again chapter 4, where the groom poetically expresses his admiration and longing for his bride, describing her beauty in vivid detail. His words aren't spoken shamefully or secretly. They're openly celebrated, reflecting pure, respectful, and joyful admiration. Similarly, the bride openly communicates her delight and desire without fear or guilt. Both express deep mutual respect, illustrating that when passion is expressed within God's ordained boundaries, it becomes beautiful, sacred, and affirming. Still, you may be asking yourself, if this freedom and beauty are clearly revealed in Scripture, why does shame persistently overshadow intimacy for so many Christians? Often, shame stems from incomplete or imbalanced teachings about sexuality that emphasize purity without equally emphasizing freedom, joy, and fulfillment within marriage. While purity is essential and protective, without a balanced understanding, it can unintentionally foster anxiety, shame, or even emotional detachment in marriage. The solution lies not in ignoring purity, but in embracing it as the pathway to joyful freedom. Purity, when understood biblically, is not about suppressing desire, but about directing it rightly toward your spouse within the safe boundaries of committed marriage. Purity and passion aren't enemies. they're allies. Song of Solomon affirms that passion flourishes most freely and joyfully precisely within these divine boundaries. Another common misconception believers hold is the belief that spiritual maturity means lessening or suppressing passion and intimacy. This misunderstanding mistakenly separates spiritual maturity from healthy emotional and physical intimacy. Yet the truth is quite the opposite. True spiritual maturity in marriage should naturally deepen intimacy, because genuine spirituality involves emotional openness, vulnerability, and deep relational trust. Passionate intimacy isn't something spiritually mature couples avoid. It's something they lovingly, intentionally cultivate. Take Proverbs 5:18-19 again as a prime example of how Scripture explicitly encourages marital passion. May your fountain be blessed. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. This passionate language isn't metaphorical caution. It's a literal encouragement to joyfully celebrate intimacy within marriage. Notice how the Scripture clearly connects blessedness, marital commitment, and passionate delight. There's no contradiction here. Passionate love, when expressed within marriage, enhances relational harmony, emotional health, and spiritual intimacy. But perhaps you're still wondering practically, how can we, as individuals and church communities, overcome these persistent misconceptions and shame surrounding intimacy? The first step is open dialogue. Churches and Christian communities must become safe spaces to openly discuss intimacy without embarrassment or avoidance. Silence fuels misunderstanding, shame, and isolation. Conversely, open, honest conversations empower believers, helping them see intimacy as God intends, pure, joyful, and sacred. Second, education is vital. Teaching openly about the Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and related scriptures can help believers understand intimacy's divine context. Balanced teachings, which equally emphasize purity and joyful fulfillment, equip believers with a complete picture of biblical intimacy. It dispels fear, guilt, and shame, replacing them with healthy, holy freedom. Third, emotional and spiritual healing is crucial. Many believers carry emotional wounds related to intimacy, perhaps from past mistakes, misunderstandings, or trauma. Churches and ministries can provide compassionate counseling, practical guidance, and spiritual encouragement to help individuals and couples heal emotionally and spiritually. Embracing intimacy as redemptive rather than shameful helps believers experience the fullness of God's restorative love. In all these efforts, Song of Solomon remains central, providing not only theological truth, but also emotional and relational wisdom. This biblical text reminds believers continually that intimacy isn't merely permissible, it's deeply purposeful. Intimacy in marriage mirrors the relational intimacy God desires with each believer, passionate, committed, and eternally secure. Yet even as we explore these profound truths, one particular challenge persists. Today's culture often portrays intimacy in superficial or distorted ways. Casual intimacy, consumerist attitudes toward relationships, and the normalization of temporary emotional attachments all distort the biblical picture. Thus, believers must actively reclaim and embody intimacy's divine purpose. Healthy, God-honoring marriages serve as powerful testimonies, demonstrating intimacy as committed, respectful, passionate, and sacred. In reclaiming intimacy as God intended, believers must also affirm the importance of emotional intimacy. Song of Solomon beautifully portrays emotional connection as central to physical intimacy. Emotional openness, vulnerability, and mutual understanding profoundly deepen marital bonds. Without emotional intimacy, physical intimacy alone often feels incomplete, unsatisfying, or emotionally disconnected. Modern psychology confirms precisely what Scripture reveals. Emotional intimacy and secure attachment profoundly influence marital satisfaction and long-term relational health. Thus, believers must prioritize emotional intimacy, open communication, emotional vulnerability, and consistent emotional support as foundational to healthy marital intimacy. Now, reflecting deeply on all we've discussed, let me turn the conversation toward you. Has this exploration changed or challenged any misconceptions you may have held about intimacy? Do you believe churches today adequately address both the spiritual and practical dimensions of intimacy? Or is there still significant room for growth? I genuinely want your input. What specific misconceptions or misunderstandings around intimacy do you feel the church most urgently needs to address today? Have your personal experiences within church communities been helpful or harmful in shaping your understanding of intimacy? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter deeply and could provide valuable insights for many others watching right now. And if this conversation resonates with you, if it helps you better understand God's beautiful design for intimacy, then don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to keep exploring important topics like this, bringing biblical clarity and practical wisdom into conversations often left unspoken. Also, consider sharing this video with friends, family, or anyone you believe could benefit from an honest, compassionate exploration of God's incredible vision for intimacy. As we reach the final stretch of our deep exploration into the Song of Solomon, let's bring all these profound insights together clearly, practically, and powerfully. Throughout this journey, we've uncovered that intimacy within marriage isn't merely a private matter or a physical act. It's a beautiful, spiritual, and deeply emotional experience that God intended to enrich our lives profoundly. But perhaps most powerfully, Song of Solomon has shown us that intimacy itself is an expression of divine love, holiness, and sacred connection. Far from being shameful or hidden, intimacy within marriage is celebrated openly, passionately, and joyously by God Himself. Yet this powerful message of Song of Solomon confronts us with a serious challenge, one that each of us must individually and collectively face. Will we embrace intimacy as God intended, reclaiming it from misconceptions, shame, and silence? Or will we allow cultural discomfort and historical misunderstandings to continue distorting one of God's greatest gifts? For too long, Christian couples have quietly struggled with confusion, shame, and unnecessary guilt surrounding intimacy, often feeling isolated and unsupported. But imagine the transformative power if churches and believers began openly discussing intimacy as Scripture itself does, joyfully, respectfully, and affirmatively. Picture how deeply relationships would flourish if intimacy became a safe and celebrated topic, openly supported by biblical wisdom, compassionate counsel, and clear teaching. To truly embrace this vision, believers must actively discard outdated, shame-based attitudes toward intimacy, replacing them with the rich, liberating truths we've explored from Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and the New Testament. Couples who embrace intimacy as a sacred gift experience more profound emotional bonds, greater marital satisfaction, and enhanced spiritual unity. They discover firsthand the truth that intimacy, when aligned with God's intent, becomes one of the most enriching dimensions of human life. Moreover, intimacy as God designed it does something even more extraordinary. It deepens our spiritual understanding and appreciation of divine intimacy itself. Marriage becomes a living metaphor for the deep, secure, passionate love God desires with humanity. Every healthy expression of intimacy in marriage thus reinforces our understanding of God's passionate pursuit of each believer. Intimacy, far from being detached from our spiritual lives, becomes a tangible reminder of God's unwavering love, commitment, and emotional closeness. Still, embracing intimacy in this healthy, sacred way demands intentionality and courage from believers and church communities alike. It requires openness in communication, willingness to heal emotional wounds, and commitment to reclaim intimacy from harmful cultural distortions. Churches can no longer afford to treat intimacy as awkwardly taboo. Instead, they must actively cultivate safe spaces for honest, scripturally sound conversations around intimacy, passion, and emotional vulnerability. Practically, this involves integrating balanced teachings on intimacy into regular church curricula, counseling programs, and premarital preparation. It means providing compassionate support for couples struggling with intimacy-related challenges, offering clear, biblically grounded guidance. Most importantly, it means breaking the silence, openly acknowledging intimacy as God's intentional gift, not something whispered about quietly, but something openly celebrated, affirmed, and joyfully taught. As believers and churches boldly reclaim intimacy from shame and silence, the ripple effects could be profound. Couples experiencing deeper emotional and spiritual unity, marriages strengthened and renewed, communities reflecting healthier relational dynamics. Most significantly, intimacy becoming a powerful testimony to the world, clearly illustrating God's holistic vision for human flourishing, relational wholeness, and emotional well-being. To move forward practically, consider applying several key insights we've covered today. Firstly, prioritize open, affirming communication within your marriage, regularly expressing affection, appreciation, and admiration. Secondly, practice emotional vulnerability, intentionally sharing your heart's desires and insecurities, fostering deeper emotional intimacy and trust. Thirdly, reclaim intimacy joyfully within God's boundaries, intentionally rejecting shame, guilt, or fear rooted in past misconceptions or experiences. Finally, commit yourself to ongoing spiritual growth, recognizing that deepening intimacy with God naturally enriches your marital relationship. Reflecting deeply on these truths, let's also recognize the importance of personal healing. For many, intimacy remains difficult due to past emotional wounds, relational trauma, or spiritual misunderstandings. If that's you, remember that healing and redemption are core aspects of God's character. Intimacy, rightly understood and practiced, becomes redemptive, transformative, and restorative. Seek compassionate counseling, supportive communities, and trusted spiritual mentors who can guide you toward emotional and spiritual healing. You deserve to experience intimacy as God intended, pure, affirming, and joyful. Now, turning toward you, the viewer, I genuinely encourage you to take this conversation deeper. How has your perspective on intimacy evolved throughout this exploration? Have you been encouraged to rethink or perhaps reclaim intimacy in your marriage? Do you believe that openly discussing Song of Solomon could genuinely benefit Christian marriages and communities today? Your voice matters deeply, and sharing your experiences or insights could profoundly encourage others who watch this video. So please share your thoughts, questions, and experiences in the comments below. Let's build a compassionate, understanding community where honest dialogue about intimacy becomes normal, safe, and spiritually enriching. And finally, if you found this exploration enlightening, empowering, or encouraging, I warmly invite you to support this channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, and turning on notifications. Your engagement helps us create even more impactful, meaningful content, exploring vital biblical truths that often go unspoken. Share this video generously with friends, family, or your church community, sparking transformative conversations about God's beautiful vision for intimacy. Remember, intimacy isn't just a private matter. It's profoundly spiritual, deeply emotional, and beautifully divine. Together, let's reclaim intimacy as the sacred, joyful gift God always intended it to be. Thank you so much for joining us on this enlightening journey. Your support, engagement, and openness are deeply valued. Until next time, may your relationships be enriched, your marriages strengthened, and your spiritual lives deepened as you embrace intimacy as God lovingly designed it. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps spread this essential message of hope, healing, and divine beauty to countless others. God bless you abundantly as you walk forward in newfound freedom and joy.